Tonight, we are behind enemy lines again, but this time it is different because not only are we streaming on the Last Second Sports channel, but we are also streaming on the enemy channel, LAFB Network. So that means different overlay, little bit different look, and a much more fun, vibrant chat because guess what? Guess what? We got all of you in the chat together. We can pull up Rams comments. We can pull up 49ers comments. So make sure that you rep your team tonight. Ryan is my co-host from LAFB. Ryan, what's up, brother? How are you?
My man, my favorite Tim from Florida, but from Tampa, not Gainesville. Thanks again for setting this up as always. A blast, and I appreciate you pushing it to both channels. I'm glad we're able to do that. Makes it a lot of fun. So this is gonna be a fun conversation as always. Gonna be a great game as always. But always good to see you. Blessed to be on with you.
Absolutely, brother. Yeah, this is this this matchup never seems to be short of any storylines because right now the 49ers and the Rams are in damn near must-win situations. I will say this, I know as a 49er fan, this is a must-win. The 49ers started out 3-5 last year, Ryan. They were able to right the ship. I don't think 3-5 this year gets it done because unlike last year, when they didn't win the division, they had a path through the wild card. The way the NFC is set up this year with the Giants coming out of nowhere, losing to the Falcons, losing to the Bears, I don't think that they can sneak in through the wild card. They're going to have to win the division, which means they're going to have to win their division games. Going 3-5 and losing to the Rams headed into a bye would be a disaster. A disaster. I think this is a must win for the 49ers. Are you feeling the same way about the Rams this week?
Oh man, well to be honest, I forgot the Niners were 3-5 last year, so that's impressive. They came back from that, and you know it's interesting you say that because the NFC on our show we've been talking about how down the NFC is, which it is in general with Tampa looking bad, the Rams not looking great, the Niners where they are, the Packers where they are, but like you mentioned, like there's been new teams pop up all of a sudden, like the Giants are a good team. Obviously, the Eagles are considered the best team in the NFC or even the NFL. Some people would argue. I'm not as worried about this particular game for the Rams as maybe you are for the Niners because it would drop them to 3-4, which is what the Niners record is now. And seeing as, yes, I know the Seahawks are the surprise leading the division at 4-3, as good as they've played, as well coached as they are, as everything you want to say about their narratives, maybe it's just me being a hater. I just don't see them prolonging that the entire season. I think they're eventually going to fall back to what we all thought they would be, and not say they're going to be a disaster the rest of the year, but I just don't see them being a 12-5 team or a 11-6 team. So I think the Seahawks will come back down to earth, basically meaning both the Rams and Niners have plenty of time to get back in that division front. But this game is extremely important because if the Rams do lose it, then they're 0-2 against the Niners. They drop to a bad record in the division, and we just have to keep talking about how Kyle Shanahan owns Sean McVay, which is never fun to do.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're saying it's not a must win necessarily for the Rams, although certainly one you don't want to drop for sure. Okay, that's interesting. I thought for sure you'd be like, yeah, this is a must win. But interestingly enough, unlike the 49ers who struggle with Seattle and struggle with Arizona, you guys do not so much. You seem to own Arizona and you're just fine with Seattle. So maybe for you, it's not as big of a deal. You're used to going 0-2 versus the 49ers and then figuring it out in the rest of the division. So I can understand where you are coming from.
And I'll add, Jesse, that I too am like I'm the whiskey half full guy, because a lot of the Rams faithful would be the exact opposite. They would say if we lose this game, season's over, pack it in, it's done. But I'm like, you know what, 3-4, I wouldn't be good. But yeah, it's definitely an important game. And the one thing which we'll get into is that the players the Rams are getting back, and everyone, that'll be the storyline. A lot of these guys that were injured. But I see that as these are guys that are still very rusty, just getting off IR. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to come back and be at their same selves. So we'll get into all of that. But that's why this game in particular, obviously want to see them win. Hate seeing the narrative continue that they can't beat the Niners, but I don't think it's going to derail the season like it could potentially for the Niners on the opposite side.
Yeah, absolutely. Ray Barrio says NFC winner will be 10-7. I think 9-8 could win the division. I don't think it has to be 10-7 necessarily. I think 9-8 could get it done, especially depending on how tiebreakers fall. But I really could see a 9-8 team sneaking in and winning this division. You think 10-7 is it?
How wild is that? Like, no. I think 9-8 could do it too. But
Yeah.
last summer in July, who would have guessed that this division was going to be this bad? Like that's crazy.
If here's the thing is everybody thought the same thing. Okay, it's between the Rams and the Niners. The NFC West for all these years by far the best division of football. Then this year everybody goes, "Well, Russell Wilson's gone from Seattle, so they're going to take a hit. Hopkins is suspended for 6 games, so maybe they're not as good, but certainly 49ers and Rams, those are the two teams." If you had told me at the beginning of the season that Seattle was going to be just fine without Russell, I'd be like, still arguably the best division in football. Even with them being all right, not the best division of football, not even close to the best of it. And the NFC East is the best division of football. What kind of wild, weird land are we living in right now?
Yeah, from the NFC least, and now they're actually back to the NFC East, I guess. I don't know. So it's
Yeah.
crazy, man. But it's good for the Rams and Niners, though, because this means they still have a lot of time to get things right. But will they do it? That's the question.
Absolutely. Okay, so the 49ers just made a
Right
huge
on.
trade. Yeah, he's the USC fan. 49ers just made a huge trade for Christian McCaffrey. And yet again, the Rams were in on Christian McCaffrey like they seem to be in on everybody. Sounds like the 49ers edged them out with that 4th round pick that they kicked in. The Rams were willing to do a second and a third. Did you want CMC on the Rams? Were you rooting for that trade to go your way?
Yeah, 100%. And if I wanted the Rams to get CMC, and if there was any team, obvious, I mean, this is a dumb statement, but any team that I didn't want him to go to, it was the Niners, of course. But it was, obviously both teams were in. Everyone knows the reports. I'm sure you guys have talked about it a bunch on your channel. We've talked about it. It came down to, like you said, one different draft pick. And what also is interesting, that just shows how little of a market Cam Akers has. The fact that the Panthers were like, nah, we're good. We don't need Cam Akers. We'll just take this extra 4th rounder or whatever. We can get someone we think is much better than Cam Akers. So, but I definitely wanted CMC and Horn. CMC is one of my favorite backs in all of football. Wish he could stay healthier. Even with the Niners, I'm going to be rooting for him. Obviously Stanford roots. He's actually from my hometown in Colorado, went to Valor Christian High School, which is literally down the street from my parents' house. When I was in high school, it wasn't built yet. But where I went, Mountain Vista is literally now a rival with Valor High School, where Christian McCaffrey went, and they've like dominated the Colorado high school football spectrum ever since. But yeah, happy for you guys and your fans. I think he's great. The last thing I'll say, and I feel like I'm already getting long-winded on this, but the interesting thing to me, Jesse, and I wonder if you've talked about this, maybe we can go back and forth, but I said of all the teams I didn't want to go him to was the Niners for obvious reasons. But for all teams where I feel like he potentially doesn't have as big of an impact, to me, that was the Niners, just because of how good the plug and play running back situation has been for Kyle Shanahan and you guys. And obviously we haven't seen a running back with the caliber of Christian McCaffrey in that system, but it seems like whoever you guys get is a potential 1,000-yard back if he can stay healthy. So for me, I was like, hated seeing him go there, but I'm like, will he have this huge impact? Whereas if he came to the Rams, he would have had a huge impact because of how bad the running game has been down here in LA. But with you guys, what's the impact you think? Do you disagree? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think also Shanahan right now is just not in his bag the way that he normally is. He's got to figure some things out through the bye week. But it's I think unlike the trade that they made in 2019 for Emmanuel Sanders, this year is great, but this is not a 1-year play. He's 26 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He does, if the 49ers decide to opt into his contract, still has 3 years left on it. I look forward to what this offense can be with him and Debo and Trey Lance. Right now, I would say this year, maybe not as big of an impact. I do tend to agree with you there. I think he'd make a much bigger impact on the Rams. But I think next year with Trey Lance, that's where we really see that impact made. So I am with you on that. I don't know if this is true, but Isaiah seems to be breaking some news here on the channel. Kareem Hunt is an Eagle, and they already traded for, who is it for the Bears, the edge rusher?
Yeah. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? Former Ram.
Yeah. He's a former Ram.
Robert Quinn.
Yeah, Robert Quinn. So they got Robert Quinn and now Kareem Hunt. That is wow. The Eagles aren't playing around.
Is that official?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't seen it. I'm also not on Twitter, and that usually seems to be where news breaks first. So
I haven't got anything yet. I've definitely heard rumors about them going after a running back, which I don't know if that means they don't have confidence in Miles Sanders and Kenneth Gainwell, but interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wow. If he is an Eagle, I don't. You're saying we'll be fine? Are you 49ers or Rams? Which one? Because the other side of this probably shouldn't relax if you're not that fan base. I'll say that. Okay, so CMC, you guys were in on. We talked a little bit about um, how this matchup, what it means for both of these teams. Akers, he hasn't been traded actually, which is interesting because Robert Saleh went and traded for James Robinson. They needed a running back all of a sudden. He's seen Cam Akers very up close and personal for a minute here. I'm a little surprised that they didn't go make that move. What happened? How did Cam Akers fall out of such favor with this organization so quickly? What's going on there?
Yeah, well, I think it shows how little of market Akers has.
Mm.
And I remember when the news came out that they were basically announced we're shopping Cam Akers. He's not going to play this week. There's, everyone starts putting together these trade packages and it was stuff for Chris McCaffrey and stuff. And I'm like, I don't think there's that big of a market for a guy who is coming off a really, really bad Achilles injury. Yeah, he came back in record time, but there's obviously lingering effects because he just does not look nearly as explosive as he was when he was, coming out of Florida State in the draft. So there's clearly something lingering there physically. And then mentally, there's absolutely a confidence issue where, McVay, as much as I love him, hasn't done a lot of favors with, there's really not been a consistent amount of carries he's gotten per game. In the first game against Buffalo, he literally had 3 snaps and then gives him kind of more play in the next few weeks, but you could never really seize it. So to me, when you mention a guy like Saul and these others, I just think people don't know what is even there with him, whether it's mental, whether it's physical. I don't think necessarily the Rams, the fell out of favor thing is necessarily like a toxic situation. I think it was just like, hey, we gave you the opportunity to seize the lead back role. You didn't. And now you're kind of sulking in the corner when we're looking elsewhere. We're trying to find ways to make this thing work because I don't care who you are in the NFL. I don't care who quarterback you have. We cover the Chargers over here too, and we see with Justin Herbert every week. You can't throw the ball 50 plus times and expect to win football games. You have to be able to run the ball or at least tote the rock 25 plus times. And the Rams haven't done that, especially not of late. And Cam Akers hasn't given them anything that gives them any reason that they think they can. So I think he just fell out of favor with, a little bit of mental issue, a little bit of physical issue, and then just, the trust of the team, not really thinking he'll really seize the opportunity. But I mean, you've seen him against your Niners. Is this a guy that you're happy isn't on the Rams anymore? Or, I mean, he's technically still a Ram, but he's not playing this week again. He's been sitting out all practice. So
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of impartial on him. It's funny because I went back and forth last year with a couple of 49er fans that are pretty well known in the Twitter community. And they were saying that they thought Akers was better than Mitchell, and I told them they were high. And so now, fast forward to where we're at now, I feel like I've won that argument. So Akers is fine. I liked him coming out of Florida State, but the Rams just don't. Their run game just doesn't worry me. They just don't. They're not convicted to running the ball at all since Gurley left and since they went from Goff to Stafford. I just don't see that conviction. Now, this is the week that we'll probably see it because the 49ers can't stop anybody in the run game since Armstead went out. So if they're going to run the ball coming off of a bye week, watching the way that teams have ran the ball against the 49ers the last 2 weeks, this would be the week to do it. But they just, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm only paying attention to a game here or there, but don't you agree? I just feel like they've turned the short passing game and Cooper Kupp into their run game, but they're not convicted to running the ball on a regular basis. That's the way that I see it with the Rams.
and that's why their offense is stagnant, and it's not the Sean McVay offense that everyone in this league knows and people have tried to copy and emulate because they're not convicted in the run. And I mean, against the Niners in whatever week that was, 3 or 4, they ran the ball 16 times. And they were in that game. It wasn't like they were down 30. They were in that game the entire time, ran it 16 times, 7 for Hendo and 8 for Akers. So there was really no consistency you could get the back behind. And defenses know it. I mean, you see defenses are just dropping the offensive line, and we may get to it more, but the offensive line is decimated by injuries. So teams are able to get pressure with only rushing 4. So, I mean, that's a huge issue right there when you don't have to bring any extra rushers and you're still getting kind of pressure. But that allows them obviously to drop everyone back 7 deep. And so we can't even get the passing game going. And on top of that, the only one they're throwing to is Cooper Kupp. So defenses, I mean, you saw in that pick against the Niners, they knew that screen was going to either Higbee or Kupp, and both Higbee and Kupp were lined up 2 yards apart on the same side. So defense is like, well, guess we know where the ball's going. It's going right here, and in jumps your corner for the interception. So the offense has become extremely predictable. And to your point, and then we can move on, it's because they're not committed to the run. And so no defenses fear the run whatsoever.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, like I said, if they're going to commit to the run, this would be the week, because again, right now the 49ers have a weakness there without Armstead, and you're coming off of bye week. You've had 2 weeks to game plan for this. You saw how things went against the Falcons. 49ers couldn't stop the run. Then against the Chiefs, who are similar, it's not like they're committed to running the ball. They don't run it with conviction, but they were still able to gash the 49ers when they needed to. So this is the week that you've got to do it. Melissa, I appreciate it. Yes, that is intentional. And then I appreciate that, Spencer. I definitely work hard on the thumbnails. I think they are an important piece of content creation for sure. All right. So Cam Akers, he seems to have fallen out of favor with the Rams. What is going on with Allen Robinson? And Allen Robinson, he had like the one good game. And I know because he's on my fantasy team. Gosh damn it. I thought I was getting a steal. He had the one good game. And now Jefferson's back. I don't think Jefferson's a guy that I feel like Stafford trusts. I don't think things are getting any better for Robinson. Am I wrong here?
I wouldn't say you're wrong, but I would say this. I think Jefferson coming back will actually help Allen Robinson because, like I just mentioned before, the offense is so predictable and who it's going to go to. Cooper Kupp's targeted like 15 plus times every single game, so defenses know. And so, but when you add that extra element now of Van Jefferson, it's going to add mismatches across the defensive line of scrimmage and in the secondary, where I think it'll give Allen Robinson those true mismatches that McVay envisioned when they signed him to that deal, because Allen Robinson's a very different receiver than really he's ever had on his roster. He's very different than Robert Woods. He's very different than Cooper Kupp. He's very different than even Van Jefferson. And so he gives this offense an ability to do something different, but without having Van there or anybody that could stretch the field with speed, they weren't really able to utilize that. Part of that is, as you mentioned, the trust thing. There just didn't seem to be on the same page between Stafford and Robinson. But I think a lot of it schematically, having Van back will actually help. Now, the other side of the coin that we've been arguing about is that, they decided to pass on all these offensive linemen and centers and other skill guys and linebackers to draft a guy named Tutu Atwell to stretch the field. And they're not using him to stretch the field. So there's still guys in the arsenal they could use to open things up for Allen Robinson and use that skill set they haven't. So on one side, I think having him back will help. On the other side, to your point, I don't know what the hell to make of it, because it really doesn't make a lot of sense, because we know he's talented. Maybe he needs to have more breakfast in the mornings with Stafford like Kim and Kupp used to do. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something going on there for sure. No doubt about it. C. Turley says Debo didn't practice. If he doesn't play, that benefits the Rams. No, yes, of course it benefits the Rams. He has been a Ram killer. That is the 2 games a year he circles on his calendar and goes, oh, okay. Aaron Donald doesn't know who I am. Ramsey thinks he's a tough guy. Yeah, 100%. I am going to kill the Rams game in and game out, and he does a great job of doing it. C. Turley follows up and says, you guys both do a fantastic job discussing the game. I appreciate it. Ryan, you going to be at the game? I'm going to SoFi. Jessie, when are you going to go to a game? Ryan, are you going to be at the game?
Turley, yes, I will be down at SoFi, down in the pink lot. We're doing a bunch of actually tailgating, filming. Brittany Betts on Twitter and Paula on Twitter are doing a new tailgate show. So we'll be doing a bunch of content down there. So come say what up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super dope. Yes, of course. Go say what's up. I planned on going to the 49ers Chiefs game this year, but once Trey Lance got injured, my son, who's 8, is starting to get big into football. He loves Lamar Jackson. So I actually decided, instead of me going to California from Tampa and going to a game by myself, that I would take my family to the Bucks Ravens game tomorrow night. I think that's a good decision. Seeing
Yeah.
Tom Brady play possibly before he retires and seeing Lamar Jackson play. I just love good quarterback play. I'm a quarterback, like, you give me good quarterback play and I'm in heaven. The Chiefs and Bills game, I mean, I just couldn't take my eyes off the television. And even last week when the 49ers were losing, I hated every second of it. But watching Patrick Mahomes play is also really fun. So, I don't know. I like watching good quarterbacks play. I will definitely be at multiple games next year, no doubt about it. But this year, the way things fell didn't make a lot of sense for me to go. But definitely go say what's up to Ryan in the pink parking lot, right?
Pink lot, yes, sir, down in the
Pink lot.
tailgate and
Okay.
stuff. So we'll have fun down there.
There
But
you
yeah,
go.
you get dad brownie points. You gotta be dad. You can't go by yourself. So I respect that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like that'd be a bit selfish. C. Turley says, I will definitely come by and say what's up. And Jesse, I appreciate that. Good dad, brother. God bless you guys. Yeah, God bless you as well. Appreciate you contributing with the super chats. All right, I've got another question, and then
Mhm.
I'll flip it over and allow you to ask some of the things, but I gotta get these off. The Rams are not a team that just sits on their hands at the trade deadline. And I know
Mhm.
they were in on CMC. We talked through that whole thing. Do you foresee any other moves, and or are there any moves out there that you're eyeing saying that one would make sense for the Rams? Because I think Tuesday is the deadline. You guys still have plenty of time to go make a move. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if they didn't do at least one move. And I'm not saying it's going to be a blockbuster move. It might be something very small that doesn't move the needle. But yeah, they don't sit around. There is needs they have to do to address mainly because of injury. But I would be shocked if they didn't. Obviously, one name circling a lot is Brian Burns out in Carolina, just because of the obvious that they're potentially fire selling, which I've heard reports they're not. But obviously, when you get rid of CMC, that kind of doesn't necessarily align with that reporting. So Brian Burns is the guy. I know there's been talks about Bradley Chubb out in Denver potentially getting moved, and the Rams obviously made the deal for Von Miller last year. Les Snead and George Payton out in Denver have a really good relationship and can make things happen. So, and I would think if the Broncos are going to move Chubb, they'd rather send him to the NFC to a team like the Rams who they've dealt with before, as opposed to an AFC team. So I could see that one being um, I know they would love to get after an offensive lineman. I just think in today's NFL, like, teams aren't going to trade good offensive linemen. So it's just not going to happen. They'll shed cap for other players. It's just, I feel like it's so rare to see an offensive lineman go. So I don't think that's really in the cards for them, but I could see them also going after a running back. I know there was a chat in here about Kareem Hunt to the Eagles. If that's not done, I know there's been talks about them potentially targeting a guy like Kareem Hunt or others. So I could definitely see an edge rusher, could definitely see a running back. And then obviously if someone was selling an offensive lineman, I could see them going after that just because of how injured they are. But I just don't see a team giving up anything that'd be worth what draft capital they'd have to give. But I'd be shocked if they didn't make some kind of move. Do you think the Niners do anything, or they're done at CMC and they feel good where they're at?
I I'm sure they're gonna look into some things. I think that ultimately they'll probably be done. Maybe. God, I don't know. The 49ers are tough. They always seem to pull off. Usually it's not them doing the splash trade. It's they're the ones that get like the little ancillary piece that ends up helping. Last year it was a Minahu. The year before it was Willis. So they they make these little moves that end up helping and adding depth. Maybe, and I saw somebody in the chat say Ndamukong Kung Su, they wouldn't have to trade for him. That's
Mhm.
possibly a guy that they do actually sign though, because they certainly could use some help right now when it comes to the defensive line with Eric Armstead out. What about Isaiah Wynn for you guys? You talked about offensive linemen. I don't know where you guys are at with the tackle positions, but Isaiah Wynn can play either tackle. Sounds like he was out there to be had before the season
Mhm.
started, and he still may be available. Would that be somebody that interests you?
Yeah, I've seen his name pop up, and obviously first round pedigree out of Georgia. The fact that he's been circled around as like available, and the fact that it hasn't happened yet for the Rams makes me think they're not totally interested. Um, which is surprising because of the injuries they have. But I just think they don't see him potentially with his struggles that he's had with the Patriots and whatnot as potentially a guy that is better than what they have, as odd as that is because of who they have left. They're going to be starting most likely this week. Alaric Jackson, who was an undrafted free agent out of Iowa, has been playing guard his whole NFL career, or you can't even say playing his whole career. It's been just this season because of injuries. And now they're going to actually slide him over most likely to play left tackle with Joe Noteboom now being injured as well. So they definitely need it, at least for depth. It just knowing how the Patriots operate, I'm guessing they're probably asking a good amount for Isaiah Wynn just because of that first round pedigree. But definitely one I could see. The other one I threw out a while back, a week or so ago, was Cam Akers and a draft pick for Melvin Gordon out in Denver at running back. And both seem kind of unhappy with their situations a little bit. Denver seems like they maybe, you know, not necessarily fire selling, but if they were to lose in London this week to Jacksonville, they obviously are shedding some contracts. But I would see them keeping his contract, but they would get Cam Akers and a draft pick back. Both backs get kind of a fresh new start. Now, I know Rams fans don't love that because of the fumble history with Gordon, but he is the most explosive back the Rams could have since Todd Gurley, and they happen to be in the same draft class, just drafted, 3 picks apart. So I think if you can look past the fumble issues, he actually would be a really good fit in this Sean McVay offense, but we'll see if that moves the needle for anyone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Ramon, no boom is out. He's done for the season. I lied. I said I had one question. I have another question.
Keep rolling, baby.
If the Rams don't make the playoffs this year, how much do you think that weighs on Aaron Donald's decision to possibly retire?
That's a great question. It's wild hearing how much like he was actually that close, like gave his papers to the Rams about retiring. I would think, depending how the season ends, if they miss the playoffs, but it's close and they battled and it was kind of came down to like just couldn't overcome the injuries, I would think he'll still come back unfinished business. He still obviously signed that extension, so still had years left. If they were to lose what are they at 3-3? So they've played 6. So if they were to lose, 8 of their next 11 games, then I could see him be like, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with this. But if it's a hard fought, close battle, I think he says, all right, we get healthy, make a couple moves. We're right back to where we were a year ago. But yeah, that's a great question because I didn't really believe he was as close as many thought until it came out that he legit gave the Rams his papers. So, that's, I wouldn't say a fun question to think about if you're a Rams fan, but definitely one that has to cross our minds because of how close he was.
Yeah,
I still
absolutely.
believe.
Yeah.
I still think, Jesse, this is what I've said all when the reports came out. I think McVay, Donald, and Stafford all walk away the same offseason. Whether that's sooner or later, they all are basically have the exact same amount of time left on their deals. They're all obviously Donald's a little younger, but they're all around the same age. McVay's come out and said he doesn't want to coach late, but he is only 36. He just got married. Even if he has a kid, he can still coach 3 to 4 more seasons max before he really wants to be involved. So I've said for about a year now, I think all 3 of them, they tell the organization so they can prepare for that succession plan. But I think all 3 walk away the same, whether that's next year, whether that's 2 years, whether that's 3 years. But I think could be big changes here in LA all at once.
I mean, as a Niner fan, I just got giddy thinking about that. That would be the best thing ever. Like the 49ers went through a mass exodus themselves. This would be a mass exodus of epic proportion, and I would be here for it with a bag of popcorn celebrating that one. That's crazy. And it does actually make a lot of sense. It's funny because McVay's probably going to be the guy that walks away here in a few years and is in TV. And then every year for the next 20 years, like what happened with Cowher when he retired from the Steelers, everybody's going to be talking about, well, maybe you can get McVay to be your coach. Maybe McVay. And then he'll just never come back. Like once he leaves, he'll be out of it forever, probably. And for 20 years, you're going to hear his name like you heard with Bill Cowher, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because I remember when Cowher left, everyone was like, he'll be gone a year or two. He loves coaching too much. He'll be back. But I think last point of that, I think McVay knows how special his 6 years have been. Like he's accomplished more than just about any coach in such a short time. But I think he knows also to be considered like top 5 ever, he has to win another Super Bowl. maybe even 2 more, being that 2-3. So if they were to win 2 or 3 the next 2 to 3 years, I think he'll call it good. Donald will for sure call it good. I think Stafford will call it good. So I think it obviously depends on winning, but I just would not be shocked at all them all walk away at the same time. And like I said, though, I think they've had those talks. If it's I'm literally just like spitballing. I haven't like heard this from the organization, but I feel knowing how close Snead, how close the organization is, that they've had those talks and been like, hey, this is kind of my success, my career plan. Let's make sure this organization's in a spot to not just turn into an absolute train wreck when we all walk away. But we'll
Yeah,
see.
absolutely. Matt, I got to be honest, I haven't even tried yet. I've been super busy. I will try here after the stream. I've been saving your comment though so that I can go try to get you wrenched up in the chat for sure. Okay, I think
What's
I'm
the wrench?
out of my
What's the,
questions. Is there
what's the wrench?
anything that you want to ask me on the Niners side?
What's the wrench? What is that? That's my first
It's
question.
yeah, so that way that I've got people in the chat that monitor things for me and can go through and clear out the riffraff.
Okay, gotcha. I like it. Good. Okay, so you said toss to me now for questions, right?
Yeah, yep, go ahead. Feel free. I
The
feel like I'm
first one,
questioned out.
yeah, no, I mean, keep them coming though. But first one, and this isn't necessarily on this game, but I feel like it's never come up, and we always, keep things very cordial, and everyone knows that I respect the hell out of Kyle Shanahan. I think he's a great coach, but I'm also not shy that I believe, and I've even said when we've been on it that I not necessarily is overrated, but seems to get a lot of excuses compared to other coaches. Always kind of has done a lot of good things in San Francisco, but is also under 500 as a head coach. Has his Super Bowl appearance, NFC berth, and then missed the playoffs 3 times or whatnot. Passed on Mahomes, passed on Deshaun Watson for Brian Hoyer when they drafted Solomon Thomas. They ended up trading for Jimmy G, who's his quarterback. So anyway, not meaning that by disrespect, but I feel like a lot of excuses. But for the first time really ever, I've started hearing that there may be the seat warming a little bit. Do you find that true at all, or no? He's still unscathed. He's basically good until this whole Trey Lance experiment unfolds.
Man, I'm kind of 50-50 on this. I know where I stand on it. I don't think that he deserves to get a pass. I think if his last name's not Shanahan, then he doesn't get this
That's what I'm
leash
saying.
that he's been given. He just doesn't. That name holds weight in this league. It does. But when you look at Kyle Shanahan through, and it's funny that as somebody who's an outsider is looking at this and now saying, hey, which you did in the past, but again, you're bringing it up here. I love this because right now this is kind of the talk of the town here in San Francisco land. When you look at Shanahan, he's been a play caller, I believe, 16 years in this league, if I'm not mistaken, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or had his hand in play calling. 9 of those years, no, 15 years. 9 of those years, he has finished 20th or worst. And in only 4 of those years, he's finished in the top 10. This year, Ryan, the 49ers team, as talented as they are, through 7 games, basically has scored the same amount of points as they did in 2017 with no talent. I mean, a depleted roster that was in complete rebuild mode. That to me is not signs of an offensive genius. An offensive genius elevates everybody on the team, and you score more points than what you're supposed to. You get the best out of players across the board. That's what an offensive genius does. You hear a lot of people say things like, well, Jimmy, and I was one of these guys. There's no way Jimmy Garoppolo without Shanahan can do what he's done. Jimmy Garoppolo is elevated by Shanahan. And I think there is some truth to that, but I do start to question it because we're seeing players that aren't great by any means, but players are all of a sudden starting to leave Shanahan's system and they're getting a bit of a resurgence in their career. They're doing some things outside of this system. And then you've got an all-pro at every level on this offense right now. You've got an all-pro running back. You've got an all-pro receiver, all-pro tight end, all-pro left tackle. And you cannot score points in the second half. It's been awful. Awful. I don't know, man.
Yeah.
I gotta imagine that York is running a little bit thin on patience. You cannot allow the injury excuse to be a thing year in and year out. This man is in year 6, still has a losing record, is getting further away from closing that gap with every loss the last couple weeks. I mean, that gap is widening. I don't know, man. I'm with you. I think that he's a bit overrated. I don't think he's an offensive genius. However, I will also say that he doesn't have to be an offensive genius to be a good head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's a label that's followed him as an offensive coordinator. That was a reason he was hired, is because the offense, the offense, the offense. But they've done a great job developing some of that late round talent. They have done a great job with the defense. They have put together 2 really good seasons. So he can be a good head coach without being a great offensive mind, so to speak. But when you're not winning, and most of those games you're not winning because of your offense that you control, that you're supposed to be a genius at, that's a problem. So I'm with you, man. I don't know. I don't know how hot it is. I don't know if not making the playoffs makes that any hotter. I gotta imagine they'll give him a shot with Trey Lance, but man, you've had Trey Lance. Next year will be year 3. You chose not to start him in year 1.
Yep.
Then you chose to play him like he was a running back.
Yep.
If you get fired before you have the opportunity to have a real chance with Trey Lance, I know a lot of people are gonna be like, "Well, that wasn't fair. He finally got his guy and didn't get to deploy him." He had 2 chances at it and he screwed it up both times. So I wouldn't have any sympathy for him, man. There's a lot of really good coaches out there, a lot of good names out there that potentially could do something. I wouldn't lose any sleep if Shanahan was gone.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and you mentioned it about his name, um, and that carries so much weight. Where I actually give him the most credit, Jesse, is what he's done on the defensive side of the ball. And I know he doesn't play call, but as the head coach, you're in charge of the whole team.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, he hired Robert Saleh, then he promoted D'Amico Ryans. Now he's been instrumental, obviously, in some of those drafts of who they've drafted. I mean, he obviously has a say on the roster construction. I think we've talked about, he kind of has final say. Maybe he has
He
more power,
100% he
more
does.
power
Yes.
than Lynch. Yeah.
Yep.
So I would sit here and say, I don't think he's an offensive genius anymore. I don't think I'm not saying he's an offensive ineptitude or anything like that. He's definitely still a skilled offensive mind, but I don't see the offensive genius anymore. Yes, he's very good at, the zone running scheme. And like we just talked about earlier, any running back is kind of plug and play, but we haven't seen the different innovative creativity that maybe the Shanahan offense was early on in obviously his dad's coaching career and even early on in his coaching career. I think it actually was you that tweeted out, if I'm not mistaken, but when you have such little scoring quarter by quarter, I think is what you were saying. And they rank very low when you look at the different amounts of scoring per quarter, and you're relying on your defense to win you games. And even on those runs they've gone on, it's been behind historic defenses. It hasn't been the offense that's carried them there. So I like Kyle Shanahan. I respect him. I think he's a very good coach. I've just never understood the media fondness of Kyle Shanahan and the amount of excuses that seem at every turn when anything doesn't go right. Well, it's not Kyle. Whereas other teams, it's like, fire the coach, get him out of here. I mean, you see what's happening in Denver right now with Nathaniel Hackett. That guy gets 0 excuses, and he's coached all of 6 NFL total games. So it's wild to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that, I mean, obviously the national media can spin a narrative however they want, but you think about some of the big names that are out there that can really drive that narrative. You look at guys like Colin Cowherd, who worked with John Lynch. So he's not going to say anything bad about this regime. Like that's somebody he knows personally. So he's going to give all the credit in the world to this regime whenever he can. And then Shannon Sharp's another one. Shannon Sharp played under Kyle's dad. He played under Mike. So he's not going to say anything bad about Kyle. That's not going to come from his mouth. And so when you have 2 big talking figures like that a lot of people know and they're telling you he's great, and then other people pick up on it, I don't know, man. I'm not going to say fire Kyle, because the last time I did that, they were 3-5 and they figured it out and I looked really stupid. but I don't get the infatuation with him. I really don't. You in this community, Ryan, not so much in not so much on the YouTube channels, but on in the 49ers Twitter community,
Mhm.
if you say anything bad about Kyle, you are bombarded with all these messages and all these stats. It's you can't do it without just knowing that your feed is getting filled with hate and frustration and whatever. He is beloved by this fan base, a big chunk of it.
Mhm.
And I don't get it. I
Yeah.
don't understand it. And it's funny because that same fan base that is enamored with Kyle Shanahan, they don't like Harbaugh. Like, what?
Yeah.
How did you not like that Harbaugh run? But you can't get enough of the Shanahan. But like, come on, man. What are we talking
Yeah.
about? It's crazy.
Yeah.
He's got a spell on 49er fans. I don't understand it.
On the nation, apparently, because even, and this is the last thing, and we'll move on. Even Sean McVay, who's never had a losing season, there's people that want him fired for being 3-3 right now,
Mhm.
even with all the injuries they have and whatnot. And there has definitely been issues on the offense, and we've talked about the offensive ingenuity down here in LA that we're not seeing. We talked about it earlier about we're not seeing that same prowess from McVay and different play calling and sticking to the run and whatnot. So there's been issues, but I'm like, the dude's never had a losing season, and he's sitting at 500 right now, going into the bye, 4-2 after a bye in his career. So potentially can get to 5-2 if they win this game. And there's kind of a 60-40 or 40-60 feeling of the fan base ready to move on from McVay. Like it's crazy. Like I want to
Well,
understand.
and you just won a Super Bowl. I think a lot of
Yeah.
that is LA too. It's the market. I
Yeah.
will say this too. The other reason that people are unwilling to move on from Shanahan is because they are worried about the what if.
Yeah.
What if you get a Chip Kelly? What if you get a Tom Zula again? I understand that, but you cannot be worried about if Shanahan lands on his feet and does well somewhere else because he's frankly not doing the best job here. If he goes
Mhm.
somewhere else and does well, more power to him. If the next head coach is not the guy, well, then guess what? You fire him and you keep going until you figure it out. But if what you have right now, you can't put together back to back winning seasons, and I'm not, all likelihood is they turn it around, they still make the playoffs. This is a moot point.
Mhm.
But if this season continues the way that it is, you cannot put up points. You're losing to teams you shouldn't lose to. You don't make the playoffs. You've now never had back to back winning seasons. You still have a losing record after 6 seasons. Yeah, man, you deserve to not be here.
Yeah.
That's just my personal opinion.
I mean, it's a results league. I mean, that's how it should be, I guess. So, and that's how every coach gets treated. So it's interesting, but like you said, they could turn things around, and it won't even be a discussion if make the playoffs, obviously. So when you look at, a few more for you, Jesse, then we can wrap
Let
up.
me
But
let me run through the super chats real quick because I think they're
yeah,
talking about this. Matthew Sanders says, Ryan, please spread the word in LA. The Niners under Shanahan basically can't win if they're down going into the fourth quarter. 1-31 when they're down
dang,
3+. MILF Hunter says the same exact thing. You know what's funny? So that stat came out. Then people started throwing out on Twitter, well, if you look at all the coaches, here's their record. They threw out McVay's record. He's like 4-25 in the same scenario. Same thing with Belichick. He was like 5-27. I understand you're not going to win a lot when you're down going in the fourth quarter. That's just the way the league works.
Mhm.
But when you take that and you spread it out over 100 games, yeah, sure, 4-25 doesn't sound a lot better than 1-30, but it's pretty significant because if you're talking about a 100-game sample size, you're talking about 12 wins versus 3 wins in those same scenarios.
Yeah,
That's a big difference. You're talking a massive percentage shift. In fact, the league average is 13%, and Kyle Shanahan's sitting at 3%.
yeah,
So, and it doesn't, and by the way, it doesn't get better. It doesn't get much better if you move that to halftime. If you just say he's down by that same amount after halftime, he's something like 7-37 or something like that. So
wow.
he just second half, man, he can't. He can't.
One
Oh yeah, an
one
all pro fullback too. Forgot all about that. So all pros at every level,
one
no
point
doubt
on
about it.
that
Oh,
bef-
there was one more, two more.
before you move
Gammon
on.
says, Ryan, what's your favorite number? Mine is 8.
14.
14.
Real quick though, going back to that last comment just before you
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah.
One thing to, and this is, they're obviously different people, but I remember with Mike Shanahan, this was a big, big thing too. And maybe it's just the Shanahan scheme or whatever, but Mike Shanahan was one of the best coaches on script. When they had those scripted plays in the first half, that offense hummed. They were a different team in the second half, but he also had a quarterback named John Elway that bailed them out a lot of times in those fourth quarters. So that might just be a Shanahan scheme thing where it's great on script. Once you're in the second half off script, that's why you see those 1-30 results.
Well, 100% on script. And I fully expect the 49ers will come out and score points on the first drive, maybe the first two this week. That's what they do. And then they do fall off when they're off script. And to your point, this is actually a great comment by KW. He's echoing those sentiments. Says the whole offensive genius idea is total crap. The QB and your offensive weapons determine your success. Coaching and scheme aren't as important. There are some guys that still get the most out of what they have. When you look at the Giants this year and their record with that roster can't hold a candle to the 49ers roster. When you got guys like Matt Patricia, who ran out of Detroit and was a defensive guy, and now he's calling the offense with Bailey Zappi, and they're putting up more points, no receivers. It means something. The scheme means something. I do agree. Players, what is it? The Jims and the Joes are more important than the X's and O's, or whatever that saying is.
Jimmy's and Joes.
Yeah, so the Jimmies and Joes, that's what it is. Are more important than the X's and O's? Sure. I agree with that, but X's and O's certainly do mean something. And C. Turley says that's exactly how this league works. Shanahan only fails 3% of those situations. Other coaches are above 13%. Yeah, exactly. That's what we were just talking about.
One thing I'll also add, Jesse, on that, the last comment was, and this is my opinion, but after watching a lot of film and obviously just seeing these unfold, X's and O's or scheme, whatever you want to call it, I think have a huge impact for 2 to 3 years max. And then you're kind of maxed out on your talent at that point, and defenses have figured you out. Because even look at the Rams McVay. I mean, he turned Jared Goff into a bona fide Pro Bowler. They went to a Super Bowl with Jared Goff. Guess what? Year 4 comes. Everyone kind of knows what they're doing. Everyone knows what Jared Goff's ceiling is. No more Todd Gurley. And all of a sudden the Rams offense falls flat. They have to go out and get, after 2 years of that, go out and get Matthew Stafford. So scheme is absolutely important, but it's a 2 to 3 year window depending on your talent. And then you really have to upgrade that. And Niners are sitting here year 6, right? And haven't necessarily upgraded the quarterback, but also I think the scheme has just fallen flat where defenses kind of know what's coming.
Yeah, 100%. See, remember when I said people hate Harbaugh around here? What did Harbaugh win us? Harbaugh got fired. Here's the thing. I understand that Harbaugh didn't win a Super Bowl. And I'm not even asking that Kyle Shanahan wins a Super Bowl, but can I get back-to-back winning seasons? I knew when Harbaugh was here that the 49ers were going to be competing for a Super Bowl every year without fail. Here, it's like, okay, well, every other year we get to run it up. We'll figure it out. Harbaugh, his winning percentage is one of the best in history of the NFL. In fact, we can remove all of Kyle Shanahan's losing seasons. Let's just take the 2 seasons that he's had winning seasons. You realize in those 2 seasons, his winning percentage is what Harbaugh's was for a 4-year span, including an 8-8 season. So if we just remove every bad season Shanahan has, at his best, he's as good as what Harbaugh was over the course of a 4-year span. People sleep on Harbaugh. I don't understand it. And again, yes, he didn't win a Super Bowl. I'm not trying to claim that he did something that Shanahan didn't in winning that Super Bowl, but that run was very impressive. And like I said, we knew for 4 years, we felt very confident that this was a team that was going to get it done. I can't say the same thing about this era with Shanahan. I can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting. I luckily Rams fans don't have that to look back on because we had, the Jim oh man, that's how Jeff Fisher. There we go. That's how forgettable he was. We had the Jeff Fisher era before. So no one is wanting to go back to that. So at least we're good there. You have any more super chats to get through, or you get on that?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, if you find any more, pop them up. But looking at this game, Jesse, so Let me ask you two questions, and then we can maybe get to predictions and wrap up. What is it about this matchup? Everything we just talked about with Kyle Shanahan and the Niners and their struggles over the course of a 16 or 17 game season now. But what is it about this matchup that for some reason, because we talk about it all the time, but well, I'd love to hear it from you. Why is it the Niners just have the Rams number and are always able to not just win, but really dominate? I know the last game, the score was a lot closer, but I mean, you guys basically dominated from the get-go and controlled that game. And it seems to be that way almost every game. Even the NFC Championship game, you guys controlled most of the games, and albeit some mistakes at the end of there where Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp played some hero ball and came back and won it. What is it about this matchup where the Niners just absolutely know what they're doing and come out and dominate?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that go into it. I do think it's funny because we were just talking about Shanahan and maybe how he's slightly overrated, but him versus McVay, man, that's a game that he gets up for. McVay was a guy that coached under Shanahan. So I've got to imagine that they pretty much know each other inside and out. There are some tricks that sometimes the master just doesn't give. He'll give a lot, but there's always something that he leaves up his sleeve. And seems like he's left those tricks for Sean McVay, and McVay just can't figure it out. Although when it was most important, he did figure it out. But I think there's some of that going on. I think there's a little bit of a big brother syndrome there. I also think the 49ers get up for this game because there's been a lot of trash talk between the Rams and the 49ers. It's a division game. And the Rams are not afraid to talk a little bit. And I think the 49ers have internalized that and they've used that to their favor. Plus, you add in the fact that at least the last couple times that these two teams have met, the 49ers have needed wins. They've been in very desperate situations. And usually a desperate team that's talented, they find a way to pull that game out and go get the W. So I think it's just a perfect storm of a few different things that that are working in the favor of the 49ers. And sometimes there's just stylistic matchups. A plus B does not equal C. And I use this a lot when it comes to fighting. You can have three fighters. Fighter A loses to fighter B, but beats fighter C. And fighter C can lose to fighter B. There's no guarantee. Styles make fights, and styles make fights when it comes to football. And the 49ers just have a style that is built to beat the Rams. I wish that style could carry against other teams the way it does against the Rams, but for whatever reason, man, they've got that number. They've got that number.
Yep. Yeah, no, and that's, I think you hit every point needed. It's definitely the biggest one for me is just that big brother complex. Like, I think McVay wants so badly to beat Shanahan and the Niners. Like, you can tell, like the week leading up to the game, like he has a different emotion at the podium at practice, like about this game. And it's not a hate, it's definitely a love, but it's a big brother. Like, you want to beat your big brother. And I think he tries too hard and he loses sight of little things that can work. And so, not at all taking anything away from the Niners and Shanahan, because everything you said I think is absolutely true. Their style just somehow fits. The rivalry is renewed, which is great to see, like it was back in the 90s. So I love seeing that. But I think it's also a little bit of McVay and the Rams like trying to do too much and almost getting too cute and losing their identity sometimes. And I think that's why they were able to win that NFC West or NFC Championship game, because after the two heartbreaking losses they had during the season, especially in week 17 and overtime, it was like, all right, who are we? Like, who are we going in this game? Like, we can't just keep having these detrimental, horrible losses, whether it's on a fumble, whether it's on a pick six from Stafford, whether it's on us abandoning the run when we're tied. Like, we have to find our identity against this team. And so will they do that this week? Coming out of a bye, I think that certainly helps. But yeah, to me, it's the combination of everything you said. And then it's also the Rams just kind of beating themselves because they're really just, I don't know. They just want it too bad almost. As weird as that is to say.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I got to address a couple more Harbaugh hate here real quick.
Please do. Let's do it.
Judd says, Jessie, Harbaugh's offense sucked too. And Melissa says, please stop loving the Greg Roman and Crabtree area. It's funny. This fan base labels Kyle Shanahan as an offensive genius, and I just told you through, I think, 15 years of coaching, his offenses have finished top 10 in points 4 times, and 9 times they've finished 20th or worse. Let's go look at Greg Roman for a second. Here in San Francisco, points per game, they finished 3rd, 4th, 4th, and 22nd. That 22nd is the only time an offense that he's led has finished outside of the top 20. Shanahan's had it happen 9 times. In fact, he's had a top 10 offense with Baltimore twice. He had the number 1 offense, number 3 with the 49ers, 4 with the 49ers in points. We can talk about yards, but points are what matter. Number 8 with Baltimore, and even with Buffalo. No, excuse me. I'm a little off here. Sorry. He finished top 10 with Baltimore 1, 2, 3 times. He finished, I apologize, I was looking at points plus. He finished 11th, and 11th with San Francisco, and then 25th. That was his only time outside the top 20. So 11th 3 times, and with Buffalo, he finished 10th. So if Shanahan's a genius and Greg Roman is buns, make that make sense. I was looking at points plus, the overall, like the points differential, which obviously the 49ers defense was phenomenal. He's going to win there. But offensive points in San Francisco, 11th, 11th, and 25th. If you look at Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, he's finished outside the top 20 like 3 times. So
what's so interesting with Greg Roman, and obviously we're getting a little off topic, but he may honestly be the most impressive offensive running mind. I'm saying that horribly, but basically when it comes to the running game, Greg Roman may be one of the most gurus, if we're going to use that word out there. It's where the passing game, where he really kind of falls apart and isn't necessarily as up to the times or whatnot. I mean, obviously there's the Kaepernick years where he was in San Francisco, and obviously has Lamar Jackson now. And so when they are able to run the football and commit to the run, it's like those offenses are just dynamic. It's just the passing game. But overall, obviously you have the numbers there. He overall, did more with what he had.
He is what we think Kyle Shanahan is when it comes to the rushing offense. You want to know his numbers? It's interesting you bring that up. 1, 2, 3, 4 times he's had the best rushing offense in the league. Twice he's had the 3rd best. Twice he's had the 4th best. Once he's had the 5th best, and the worst that his offenses have finished in rushing is 8th.
Yeah. Well, when Jim went to Michigan, he called his brother and was like, make sure you get Greg on your staff because the dude knows what he's doing.
Absolutely. Gammon says 49ers dominate because Chronic has no hands.
Oh, come on. Benny Sco's turning around this year. I don't think Ben has a drop this year. I think Benny Sco's been great. He's actually been he's been the use check for this Rams offense, playing fullback a lot.
Absolutely. Hey guys, I appreciate the discourse. You guys that I'm talking with are some of my biggest supporters, so I appreciate you. I just like to go back and forth. I highly disagree when it comes to Shanahan. I don't understand the love. So I'm definitely going to have a good opportunity to have a back and forth. But when I do my next call-in show, I would love for anybody to call in and we can have the talk, because I think having a fair discourse and back and forth is certainly important. And it's tough when you're in the chat. I know when I'm in the chat, I hate it when like a point that I'm trying to say gets misconstrued and then I don't get to have like a rebuttal to it. So I understand being on your guys' side of things. It can be very frustrating that I just get to say whatever I want. And then you're like, oh, damn it, I want to say something back. 49ers Faithful says Kyle doesn't know how to make in-game adjustments. Well, kind of what to Ryan's point. That's what he talked about for sure. If McVay swapped with Kyle, the 49ers would have a Super Bowl. Ooh. That's an interesting one. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Do you agree with that? Do you think if they swapped, do you think the Rams would have had a Super Bowl, or do you think the 49ers would have been the ones winning a Super Bowl?
Well, there's 2 major factors you have to look at when making that swap. And one is, do you think who's better, Jimmy G or Jared Goff? And that's
Jared Goff.
Pretty fun debate. You would probably, because you have had to watch 6 years of Jimmy G. I watched some bad years of Jared Goff. So that's one. And then 2, I know the Rams have Aaron Donald, but when you look at the totality of McVay's career here in Los Angeles, so 6 years, just like Shanahan, they were hired the same year, you would probably lean towards the Niners having better defenses from top to bottom overall in those spans. So
For
when you
sure.
look at that, you would say, okay, I don't know. I mean, those are such hard questions to answer because it's all hypothetical. Like it's the
For
whole
sure.
like, what if Aaron Rodgers was with the Patriots instead of Tom Brady? Like that whole argument, it's like it changes everything. But it would be interesting.
Yeah, it
It
would
would
be
be
interesting.
interesting.
All right, let's get into these score predictions. This is what we are here for ultimately. Ryan, who wins this game and what's the score?
Well, I hope you pick the Niners because every time you pick the Rams, the Niners dominate. So, and I think I've pretty much picked the Rams every time just because I feel like they're going to snap out of that. It's hard for me to pick against them just because, like I mentioned earlier, Sean McVay's 4-2 off a bye, so has a solid winning record off of a bye. They get a lot of reinforcements back. Brian Allen most likely back to start at center. They get Van Jefferson back. They're getting some guys on defense back as well. So they're getting a lot of key players that they've been missing for these this tough stretch that they've had some tough games. So, but they got to go against CMC, who they just saw in Carolina. I wonder if that's ever happened where players played. Well, I guess he played a game in between against the Chiefs, but the Rams themselves being on a bye played the same players back-to-back games.
Back-to-back weeks, yeah.
But they were able to contain him in Carolina. Obviously, I think he'll be a lot more effective with the Niners because of what else the Niners have. But ultimately, I think that the Rams do get it done to bring the series to 1-1 on the season. It is a home game. I'm not naive. It will basically be a road game. A lot of Niners fans here in Los Angeles. I live here, I know. So it'll basically be a road game, even though it's at SoFi. But I think they ultimately get it done. I think it's going to be, a defensive game overall because of how the offensive lines are banged up. But I'll go 21-17 Rams.
It's funny because initially I threw out on Twitter, I think it was Sunday late night or Monday. I said, well, don't worry, everybody. The 49ers do what the 49ers do. Every time they need a win, they get the slump busters on their schedule. For them, the slump busters to the Rams. They're going to win. They're going to win going into a bye week, and then everybody's going to be sucked back into this team as if nothing ever happened. But now that the week's gone on, Deebo Samuel may not play. And if Deebo doesn't play, I don't know how the Christian McCaffrey becomes very important, but man, Deebo is a difference maker, especially against these Rams.
Yeah.
That's a tough get. And the Rams are coming off of a bye. They are getting Van Jefferson back, getting a little bit healthier. They are at home, and I feel like the Rams are every bit as desperate as the 49ers. We talked about why the 49ers continue to beat the Rams. I mentioned desperation being one of those situations, at least for the last couple years. This is the one time outside of the playoffs when the Rams won that the Rams are just as desperate as the 49ers, I believe, in this game. So I think those things make it very interesting. I know that my assignment is to pick the Rams because when I do, the 49ers win. However, I am picking the 49ers to win this game. 24-23, San Francisco gets it done. And I promise everybody in the chat, if the 49ers lose this game after picking them, I will now be 0-5 the last two seasons in picking this game right. I picked the Rams to win both regular season games last year. I was wrong. I finally came around and picked the 49ers in the NFC Championship. I was wrong. I purposefully picked against the 49ers because I knew that that was my right and what I needed to do as a fan to get that win for the 49ers. So I picked against them the first time we did this show. I am going against what I know is right, and I am picking the team that I think is going to win, which is the San Francisco 49ers. And if they lose, I am done picking the 49ers in this matchup, and I apologize. You can put the loss on me, but that's just how I feel this week.
We know it's fact, and if that happens, we know there's something, whether it's in the water or whatever it is, you have some magic or whatever the opposite, voodoo in this game. So It's going to be a good one, though. Can't wait to see you down there. It's always fun because of how many Niner fans live in Los Angeles. I've said many times on my show, it's, I moved to LA in 2008. Rams didn't come here till 2016. So for those 8 years that I lived here before the Rams were here, I mean, this was a Niners, Cowboys, and Raiders town. And so the Rams now have really taken, obviously, a stronghold in the Super Bowl, and a lot of old fans have come back. A lot of young kids are really getting on board, but it takes time. I mean, it's not like it happens overnight where people just jump ship. So this is still a huge Niners fan base. I respect it. Those are the facts. Doesn't mean there's a bad Rams fan base. But when you've lived here for 25 plus years without an NFL team, you pick teams. And I have a lot of friends I went to school with in Long Beach who grew up with Montana and young teams when there was no team in LA. So obviously they picked the Niners. So it's always fun when the Niners come to town, and we'll have a blast down at SoFi. For anyone in the chat, I know someone commented earlier, but I'll be down at the Pink Lot hanging out. Come say what up. Love to meet everyone.
Yeah, I know Chris is going to the game. He's obviously a 49er fan, but he's also a USC fan.
I was going to say, is that, yeah.
USC Bush. So, Chris, I highly recommend the link in the description is to Ryan's channel. He runs a LAFB channel. So all things LA football, including those USC Trojans, you definitely can get some good insight from him. And then I would say link up with him at the game if you can, to tailgate and just pick his brain. You guys can talk USC football at the very least. But that will do it for this week's edition Behind Enemy Lines. If you are watching from my channel, make sure you give a like so that you can show some love and make that algorithm help us out. But also, like I said, link in the description, go subscribe to Ryan's channel just so you can talk some mess after this game, assuming the 49ers win. And then if you are watching on LAFB, make sure you're subscribed to Ryan's channel as well. And then same thing, if you guys win, feel free to come over to Last Second Sports, talk a little trash. We welcome it over here. Y'all have a blessed weekend. And until Sunday's post game, peace.